Refugees walking away from the life that we know and love. Nothing to do.
In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. In this present crisis, government is the problem.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of My Secret Atheist podcast. I just want to let you guys know that although this episode emphasizes Canada an awful lot, that's where I am. Still, for my American International listeners, remember that Atheist Alliance International is an international organization, so you can still contact the guest, and I'm sure she can put you through to some people who you can help out. Definitely the folks in Guatemala you can help out regardless of whether you're in Canada or not. In other news, I hope I'm getting a little better behind this microphone. I still hem and haw an awful lot. I joined the Toastmasters at work, so maybe that'll help. It's on my lunch hour though, so that's the only negative part. I'm also interested in any feedback if there's anyone out there. My Twitter address is @godlesspoutine, Poutine. And you can also go to the blog, mysecretatheistblog.com. And now without further ado, here's this week's guest, Gail Miller. Welcome to another episode of My Secret Atheist podcast. On this episode, I'd like to welcome Gail Miller to the show.
Thank you, Sean. I'm very happy to be here.
So, Gail, I was doing some research, and you're currently on the board of directors for Atheist Alliance International, correct?
That's correct. I'm the treasurer and also looking after their refugee asylum project.
It's very interesting. On my blog, actually, I've been working sort of in the public, but also kind of, I guess, behind the scenes as well, trying to help people who are trapped in countries that do not allow them to be atheists, or at least openly atheist. And I understand that you've been doing some similar work.
Yes, in 2013, at Atheist Alliance, or AAI, we started to look into developing a refugee asylum project, and that was to help non-believers in countries who were fearing for their lives or in hiding and are felt persecuted and wanted to get out. And that was in 2013, so it's been going for a little more than 2 years. Now, there's a lot of talk about the refugee crisis in Europe, but in the past month, we've kind of been experiencing our own refugee asylum crisis. The numbers don't compare. The numbers of refugees in Europe are in the hundreds of thousands, and ours are less than 20. But in the past month, we got 5 requests for help, almost weekly. Sometimes they were coming daily. And that may not sound like a lot, but these cases are really, really hard. They're urgent in the sense that the people who are asking us for help are in desperate situations. They're fearing for their lives. They're suffering emotionally and sometimes physically. They're on the run. So there's a real sense of urgency that we have to respond to them right away. And then the resources or just the support to help them is so limited. So you're getting a really desperate call and you're trying to do whatever you can to help them, but we're also dealing with all the regulations of refugees and people who want to declare asylum. And there's just this tremendous feeling of helplessness, like how can we help them and trying to find something and not really finding enough to help them. And the other thing for us is we don't believe that this is going to slow down. We're dealing with 15 cases now. Most of those are from Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. I wouldn't be surprised that that 15 could double in a month.
Oh, definitely. I got in contact, I guess, with someone who was stuck in Gaza for a while. Luckily, she was able to get out, and this is during the Israeli bombardment. Yeah, she really feared for her life there. For me, it was a little frustrating because it seemed that there is a lot of infrastructure in existence right now for people who are refugees and, let's say, of some sort of religious persuasion, but there doesn't seem to be a whole lot out there to help people who are non-religious.
Yes, and I would agree with you, because there is a thing in Canada called the sponsorship agreement holder, and these are charitable organizations that have been approved by the government to sponsor a refugee. I would say half or over half of those charities or those organizations are religious, and that doesn't mean that we can't ask them, but I'm not sure that we would get a good reception from all of them. We did get a good reception from the Lutherans, who were willing to help us out. But then the problem with some of these organizations is that they've only been given a limited number of spots per year to accept a refugee, and most of them have been taken for this year already. So even if we do find one that will respond to us and say that they can help us, often they've used up all their spots for this year. So it is really, really tough being kind of on the outside in the secular community, where we don't have established networks and organizations who can readily accept refugees.
So tell me a little about these spots. I don't really understand. Are these paid sponsorships, or are these some sort of quota by the government?
It's a quota. So when I spoke with the Lutherans, and they said since about, I think, 2012, every year the quota gets less and less. So this year they had received 20 some, or say they received 20 some spots. Last year it was probably 35. So they are allowed to bring in 20 refugees in the calendar year. If you're coming from Syria, you can come. If you're a Syrian refugee, there is no quota. But for other people, there are. And that's just one aspect of the problem. The other aspect of the problem is that the people who are asking us for help, have to have left their country. If they're still living in their country, the Canadian government is not going to get involved. And that's pretty standard, I think, for all Western countries. That's kind of like meddling with a country's affairs. The person has to leave. And you're asking someone to leave with no guarantees. 2 of the 15 people that have asked us for help left their countries. Both applied at the UN High Commission for Refugees to get refugee status. Both were denied. Now both are living in a really precarious situation in a country where they have no legal rights. They shouldn't be there. But if they return back to their other country, they're faced imprisonment or possibly death. So there's tons of these sort of obstacles that come in the way of helping somebody in these countries.
I'm aware of one case, I think, in Saudi Arabia. Armin from Atheist Republic was talking about this, even set up a fundraiser where a young, I assume she's young, I don't know, a Saudi woman went to the Hajj, and she actually displayed a picture of a sign that said atheism on it, or sorry, Atheist Republic on it. And she actually decided then it'd probably be best to leave the country. She was in a dangerous situation there. She was able to get out and get to Turkey, But I've heard that there's actually a fair bit of red tape, and she's not able to leave Turkey. So now she's stuck in a country where I don't even think she can speak the language.
Yeah, exactly. And we are just in the process now of raising two cases that we've had where the people actually had their interviews with the UNHCR and were just kind of categorically said no. And so we're bringing up those two cases with the head office in Geneva and saying, please review these cases and ensure that our non-believers are getting a fair representation and a fair hearing in these when they go and have their interview, because they get stuck in almost as bad a situation as if they had never left their country.
Well, yeah, and in fact, in the very action of leaving your country can probably out some of these people in a way, right? You go, you throw yourself on the mercy of the court, and then word's out, right?
Well, and that is exactly our very first person contacted us from Afghanistan. And that has been his biggest fear, is that people had reported him to the police, and to the government. So he's afraid that once he hits the border and they check his passport and who he is, they will arrest him. So again, as I said, there are just all these complex or really tough obstacles in helping these people. And yet their cases are so desperate. And it just leaves you with a tremendous sense of helplessness.
Yeah, just to not to pile too much more on, but if you think about it, I mean, these people, I mean, the process is really seems to be geared towards the opposite situation these people are in. I mean, if you're expected to get out of your country, and then, which I guess is understandable, but then B, I mean, if you've got this quota system per year, I mean, these people, like, for instance, if you're a Bangladeshi blogger, for instance, some of these people's lives are in danger. I mean, they don't have time to sit around and wait for another year to see if they make it for next year's list.
Exactly. And I think that is what's driving when you see the hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people who just up and just said, I'm just leaving and going to Europe. I think it just shows such a breakdown in the system, and also that it just is so cumbersome. And, for a lot of our people too. So another option we'll say is try and get a tourist visa and come to a conference. Try and apply for an educational program here, even if it's 9 months. And once you get on, Canadian soil, you can ask for asylum. But the countries have, in Canada and others, are screening any travel visa from places like Pakistan and Saudi Arabia so securely, so tightly that these people can't get visas. So you can't get a visa to leave your country, even if it's a tourist visa. And I don't know how else these people leave. Then either they cross in the night to a neighboring country, which may not be any better than where they are living right now. And the other thing with the asylum seekers is that pretty much they have to falsify documents. The big thing in getting a visa to leave these countries is that you have this incredible evidence of ties to your home country. You have house, you have a property, you have a job, you have family. All of this because the country you want to visit wants to make sure you're back on the plane going home whenever you said you were, that you're not declaring asylum. So a lot of people have taken to falsifying documents. That, again, makes it harder for us because we can't be really part of that process of helping them to falsify documents. Or even if they said, I got the visa, I now need cash just to get out of here. We have been told by immigration lawyers and government officials it could look like we are trying to bring people in illegally to countries. So yet again, another big obstacle for us.
Well, yeah, if you take a look at the refugee crisis coming in from Syria, I mean, it seems like they're expected to illegally get onto EU soil before they can even declare, ask for refugee status. They can't seem. I was reading they can't seem to do that from places like Turkey, for instance. They need to get onto the EU.
Exactly. And that's why I think so many of them are doing what they're doing. This whole business of trying to get a visa, trying to get sponsored, trying to get some kind of legal status, waiting for the Turkish government to do all the paperwork. It's just too long. It's just taking too long, and there are no guarantees. I think a lot of them have just felt, I might as well just get on the boat and do it myself.
Is there any silver lining here? Is there any initiatives maybe that the AAI or some of these other organizations are currently working on?
There is. We have been working with CFI Canada, and the last I heard is CFI Canada was going to apply to become a sponsorship agreement holder. So they had charitable status in Canada. They could apply for that because we saw that as the only way to bring in our refugees into Canada. Once you get sponsorship agreement holder status, you can bring people in a matter of months. It's the fastest way to bring people into Canada. I don't know where they're at in that process. The board was going to discuss it this summer. It may still take them another year to get that approval, that status as a sponsorship agreement holder. But then we would have our own agency to deal with all of our cases. And once it's up and running, then we can start bringing these people into Canada. And the thing by going through a sponsorship agreement holder is that you do not need to have refugee status from the UNHCR. So you bypass that whole area, and we can just deal directly with the government and this person.
That sounds like a great idea. I guess we'll be following that a little more in the future. Do you have any maybe stories or personal stories about some of these applications?
I do, and I really want to bring this out because the secular community really needs to know the hardships that these people are going through. These people are part of our community, and they deserve our help. They're living under terrible conditions. Even if we get that sponsorship agreement holder through, if CFI gets it and we're able to bring people in, the government's going to require that we have $12,000 per person to support them for a year, that we've got resources. So we're going to need a lot of help. And so I really want to appeal to all your listeners to help us out on this. There's lots to do, and I hope by describing some of the circumstances that some of these people are in, it will move people to come forward and help us out with this. So there's one person, I'm going to read you his email, and this is one of the people who actually left Iran, and he says, I was living in one flat which was rented by my friend. He was a second-year college student. Last year he went to Iran but never came back. One day, the owner of the flat came and said some people asked about him, the person, about me that was living in his flat, and he was so afraid that I had to leave. From that day, I had to hide anywhere possible or beg some friend to let me stay with them. He has to move all the time, and he has to be careful every second. And this has happened in 2012. So he's been doing this for 2.5 years. 2012 was when his case was rejected. He said, I avoid talking to other people, especially Iranian. I live in fear of being caught and deported back to Iran. It makes him sick. He's been to the emergency room twice with anxiety and dizziness and lightheadedness. And every night, I think maybe when I open my eyes, I see that they have found me, and it is terrible. So he's constantly living in this fear. He also has a master's of physics, but he's not able to work because he's living illegally in a country. So this is a young man who really had a bright future and now is just going from house to house and suffering from depression and anxiety and fear. This is another person who was able to leave their country. And he said, I first started receiving threatening phone calls and then threats during his morning routine walk. And then he had the first attempt on his life in September 2012. After that, he had to minimize all outdoor activities. In December 2013, he posted a happy Christmas message on his Facebook. The next night, stones were thrown at his house. In April 2014, he says his extremist enemies tried to kill him in his bedroom, but luckily he wasn't sleeping there that night because of safety. He knew something was up. And at that point, they decided they had to leave Pakistan. And he had two daughters who were in college. He had a business, he had a house, and now they're living illegally in another country. And his daughters are, their education has stopped, they're running out of money. Another person writes, every day I am forced to pray, read the Quran, and every time I speak, I have to think about every single word I say because he just feels the danger every day. He's afraid that if he says something the wrong way or does something the wrong way, he will be reported and then jailed. And there are people in Bangladesh who have asked us for help. And sometimes at the end of their emails, they'll say, well, if I'm still alive, I will get back to you. It's just kind of heartbreaking, the situations these people are in, and they really, really deserve our help.
I think that for me, when I hear some of these stories, my initial response may be, well, it seems so hopeless. I mean, I don't know how I can help. But it sounds like there are mechanisms that are coming into place here, and that perhaps with this, with the CFI Canada, if it gets that ability to sponsor refugees, that we'd have a clear path. At any rate, it sounds that Atheist Alliance International and CFI Canada are probably the organizations here in Canada that would be in the best position to help out.
Right. And I really encourage anyone who's listening to please get in contact with myself. Is it okay if I give them my email?
Absolutely. Email, website, go ahead.
Okay. The best, if you live in Canada and you want to help us out, and we really need all the help we can get because the requests are only going to multiply in the months to come, please contact me. It's Gail, Gaili, Miller, at Shaw, SHAW.ca. I'll even give you my phone number. It's 778-866-4644. I think once we start working through and getting some roots set up, we will be able to help these people. It's going to take some time and some work, but I'm sure that with some persistence and dedication, we can get some roots set up and start getting these people into our country.
That's awesome. And I know personally that if I'm given the opportunity, I would definitely open up an extra room if that's possible in the future to help someone out. It can be something as big as that, or it can even be the smallest of things, but everything adds up.
You're right about that. And actually, that does help out because part of the $12,000 that the government wants an organization to have to sponsor a refugee includes lodging. And you can write back to the government and say, well, we have lodging for this person free of charge. Then we don't need to have $12,000. So everything helps out.
So there's also another topic I believe you are able to talk about today, and that's a school that you're helping out in Guatemala.
Right. The Guatemala Humanistas, you know, they've been around for about 3 years and they're a great group of people, and that country really deserves our help. The evangelicals kind of discovered Guatemalans, all of Central America, about in the 1970s. And you don't have to be in Guatemala City or probably anywhere in Central America very long before you're going to see signs of their existence. There are Mormon churches and Pentecostal schools. And so they've really been growing since the 70s. And if you look on a map of sort of missionary work, Central America is right up there with Africa. So the Guatemala Humanistas wanted to start a school, and we initially looked at having a school, but there were some government requirements, and the cost of getting a school up and going in Guatemala City was prohibitive. So what they did now is they came back and they said, well, let's just start with a library. Now, in Central America, and in South America, a library sort of refers more to like what we would call a community center here in Canada. And in Guatemala, the kids only go to school a half a day. So there's lots of downtime. And often, if you're kind of in a poor neighborhood, chances are you've got both parents working and the kids are kind of left on their own. So this library was going to be located in a low-income neighborhood in Guatemala City, and it was going to be open all day. So the kids who were not going to school in the morning had a place to go to, and the other ones who had the afternoon had a place to go to. And initially, it was going to just kind of reach out to the schools and bring in all the textbooks and just help the kids with their homework and tutoring them in some of their courses. And that was to build relationships not only with the local schools, but with the parents. I mean, the parents want all their kids to do well in school, and here was a place that was basically going to say, I'm going to help you with your kid with his homework and tutoring. And then they had plans that once that got accomplished and they became more secure in the neighborhood and people were coming to the library or community center, they could branch out. They could branch out into more scientific projects and tree planting, and all of this would be based on humanist principles. And they've been trying to get this going for about a year now. And all they need is $6,000 to get this kind of up and going. And it's been a really hard haul. I think they've got a few supporters, but we really need a lot more. And it's even more crucial now than before because in August, a bill was proposed to the Congress in Guatemala to mandate biblical teachings in all schools, both public and private. And this is a result of the evangelicals slowly gaining ground and more influence in the country. So the library would be exempt from that because it's not a school. And the Guatemala Humanistas are busy also trying to fight that piece of legislation. So we really need to get more involved in this and help them out. And again, if there is anybody who would like to help us out on this project, or the Guatemala, or help deal with the Guatemala Humanistas directly, again, contact me. I'll put you in direct touch with the president there, or work with us here in Canada, and let's see if we can't raise $6,000. $6,000 across a country like Canada doesn't seem like a lot, but it's been very difficult to get that money.
Is there a fundraiser page up yet that they could visit?
Not yet, because the Guatemalans just recently did a fundraiser page for their legal fees to fight the bill that was coming up in Congress. So we'll see how that goes. There are some changes right now in Guatemala. I believe the president has resigned and there's an election. So we're just kind of letting that settle down. And then we really need to focus on this library.
This library is probably the best thing that could be done too, because it's a good secular, a chance at a good secular education. I guess it's not really a school, but as you say, it's kind of a meeting place where people can get together and discuss ideas with a humanist framework that really is good for anybody in Guatemala, whether they be religious or not.
Yes, and I think the library community center plan is brilliant. Getting a school up and running takes a lot of work. And we have some schools in Uganda, and that's great. And if we can get another school up and running, that's great too. But as an initial start in a community that may not be familiar with humanist values or principles or what it's all about, it's a low cost, great way to get your feet on the ground and start with having this information and videos and movie nights available to the kids in the area. And in the developing world, kids spend a lot of time on their own. I mean, it's unusual for us in Canada because you see a parent with a kid everywhere. They, even walking to school. But once you go to these developing countries, these parents are flat out busy, working, doing whatever they have to do. And you'll see little kids as young as 3 and 4. They're just on their own, and they're walking here, there. So these community centers would be a really great place for kids to hang out. It seems like they've got a lot of time on their own, and this is a way that we can start to expose them to humanist values and some secular education and science and logic.
It would be a good way to maybe, counteract to some of the potential indoctrination that can occur, because I was reading about the initiative there by the evangelicals to get the forced biblical education in schools. And I mean, it might sort of sound like a good idea, like, okay, great, we can all study the Bible, but my impression was that they weren't intending to study the Bible as purely as literature, but that there was much more to it than that.
Yeah, and we compare Guatemala to becoming the next Uganda. Uganda has had the evangelical influence in its country for a long time, and we started to see that when they had their laws banning homosexuality and provocative dress, or what they thought was promiscuous dress. And we have a board member on from Uganda at AAI, and he says it just led from one bad law to the next. So yeah, we'll start with putting biblical teachings in the school, but what comes next? Are we going to start dealing with, the banning of homosexuality and expressions of thought, and so for us, and for the Guatemala Humanist, we had to fight this right now. We have to fight this now and stand up and let the people know there are alternatives.
I'll definitely put information on the show notes, and I'll also put it in the post for the podcast as well. And then hopefully maybe we can drum up some support for this. I guess one last thing in closing, Gail. When I did some research on you, I noticed that you, if this is the same Gail Miller, that you wrote a book, a children's book. Is that correct?
That's right. Why don't we go to church? A friend and I wanted to write something for kids to just kind of outline or give them a sense of what's out there. I think today in Canada, when I talk to people with kids, the parents sort of have a quasi or a semi belief in God, but they don't go to church, and it's not really discussed at home that much. So there's a bunch of kids sort of just growing up and not knowing that there are, that what's the landscape is out there in terms of from evangelicals to atheism. So the book was to try and say there are all these people with different belief systems or opinions, and how to deal with it, and and just to also send out a message that just let kids figure it out for themselves. I mean, give them the information, let them know that there are people out there who are creationists and they will want this, or there's other people out there who believe in evolution, and let them kind of figure it out for themselves. But along the way, let them experience and ask questions.
This sounds fantastic. We need more books like this. And actually, it sounds a lot like the Humanist library we were just talking about, because you're talking about just letting the kids sort of be in a climate of open inquiry and open discourse and learning of information, and just, coming up to their own minds, just using their own critical reasoning to form opinions or beliefs, what have you. And this book, by the sounds of it, is it just about why people don't go to church? So it's not even necessarily unreligious people, or
It's a story about a boy who has to do a science project, and he decides to do primeval soup, which is describing, the earlier stages of evolution. And he has this great idea to make a soup with gummy worms to show, how evolution started. But there are kids in the class, or one in particular, who comes from a very evangelical family. So it's a story.
And so basically, this poor kid, simply by trying to, I guess, demonstrate science, or ends up kind of walking in a bit of a debate.
Exactly. And again, it's one of these things he would not have expected it. And then, he realizes there are people out there with a different viewpoint, and how do you deal with it? And I always kind of hope that the book would have set off a whole bunch of science projects called Primeval Soup, but I don't think that ever happened.
Well, it's interesting, because looking at this book, I'm thinking that there might be a few adults who might benefit from reading it as well.
Well, if whoever wants to read it, the better, all the better.
Excellent. So you want to give any kind of contact information again?
Anyone who is interested in either one of these projects, helping refugees, that is non-believers in other countries who are persecuted, or people who want to help with secular education, or the Guatemala project, the library project, please contact me. The best way is through my email, which is Gail, Gail, Miller at shaw.ca. And if you have problems with that, just call me on my cell, which is 778-866-4644, or text me.
Gail, I'd like to thank you for coming to the podcast, and thanks a lot for being here.
Thank you very much, Sean, for letting me talk about two topics that are very dear to my heart, and I'd love to be able to give you an update, hopefully positive updates, in a couple of months.